Okay, so where are we? Um, go back. So we have a homework. I think basically you should work on it to like it's a good practice to be prepared for next week's midterm exam. As you know, like the midterm exam is going to be like similar to like the homework, similar to like the ticket practice we did, similar to the banking system that we did last week. It doesn't include using the list. It just you have one problem like for example the first midterm exam and a set of like task. But you're doing creating the same project, but this time using classes, creating one template for the entity in that domain. Like there's one entity. In this case, like for example, in the banking system, we like created this using like object oriented, and we had like a class for account, and then use that to create objects, collect the information, and basically kind of manage the account. So the midterm exam is going to be the same, similar to these practices. Um, one thing I will do on Monday, I kind of like pushed the one that we are going to do on Monday to next Friday, so that like on Monday we can do one like more practice on Monday to like kind of like in the same format of the like a midterm exam. So that could be like kind of a review and kind of I don't know maybe like a practice for the midterm exam. I think we'll work on this practice. If even if we don't work on it, I haven't I can check it and see like after creating the midterm exam to like kind of like find the better like which practice is good to work on. But in any case, this is a good practice. We've created this like method and like we created it without like using object-oriented programming. I would think that like if you want to practice like for the midterm exam, in addition to the homework, in addition to the practice that we did, go and like create the same project, this project, but this time using object-oriented programming. Okay. And that should be a good, like a, challenging practice. And then also what we are going to do on Friday. And then there will be, I think, two sessions left, and those two sessions are for the final project. And I'll be here. I'll give you time to work on the final project. Any question before we start? Um, if you want to like review what we did, if you remember, one of like in addition to the slides and everything, I created this as step by step, everything that I went through, okay, when I was creating this project. So I want to I think this would be like a great resource to review while you're working on your homework to like see like okay like every step I created this like a step by step. These are the steps. We created the class, we work on the constructor, the properties, the classes. Remember, we don't use console in the class that we create. It's a template. We want it to be independent from user interface, so we don't use console here. We created the template, and then we created went to create instances. Okay, when to create instances of the class, we created like a ticket, created like an object or instance from the class, and then it stored the information, collected the information from the user, and it stored it in the it stored the information in the object or instance. And that's and then it started like managing that information. Like if you need to do the calculations, first collected the required information and stored it in the field, like in the object field. And then there were a few processes to do, right? One at a time in the correct order. When we were creating the class, we didn't care what order we created these methods. But now we are using them, so we want to pay attention to the correct order that we are going to call them. So for example, before calculating the subtotal, you're not going to calculate the total. If you call it like the method called there were other methods, right? This was the case. Let me show you like the set of this. Okay. So the order mattered here. you wouldn't be able to go and like first calculate, like call the method calculate total cost and then calculate the subtotal. Why? Because in order to calculate the total cost, you need to know what is the subtotal. So here, when you're using them, then you want to pay attention to the order and whether like you need to call another method before calling the other one. Okay, so pay attention to that order. So we like calculated them and then like displayed the information the same way that you're gonna do like for the homework. Created a class with like the fields like methods that you need for a loan. It's a loan calculator. Then create an instance from the class, get the information, calculate like the like for the particular information you're collecting, get like calculate the monthly rate, calculate like the rate or any other things that you need to calculate, and then make the like check the decision and then display the information at the end. So you're creating the same homework you did in like before, but this time object oriented. Any question? Okay, let's go to, before I forget, let's just like take the knowledge, like the attendance, just before we move forward, so we don't forget that every time it happens. Okay, so take it, and then we can just go to the class. Let me see. Okay. So let's go to like the code we have. Um, parental. Okay. Just do this here. I'm gonna start from like kind of a starting point. So we're just going to start with this. What we did. So like remember last like in the first session we created like the class, the template itself. You don't store information in the template. You create the template and then create instances of the template and then store information in those instances. Where do you create instances? In the other class, somewhere, like for example, in the main method, you create an instance from the class, from the template, an object or instance, and then store information in the objects, in the instances. Okay, so like as long as you haven't changed anything in like after like storing the information in the object, as long as you haven't changed anything in it, the object will carry that information. So you can use it like to see like information about like a reservation, for example, reservation date and like return date. However, like you see, like a lot of times you're not dealing with one, two reservations. We deal with hundreds of reservations, thousands of reservations. That's why like we said, okay, we are going to create a list of reservations, use list to create a list of reservations. And then anytime we get a new reservation, add it to the list, add it to the list. And then if you're looking for like something in everything among the reservations, we can check the list and see whether it exists and like or not. So that's why we created the reservation. We had two reservations already, so we added the information to the list of reservations. Okay, so We want to start from, let's see, for today's class. Day 3. So, first, start here. Create. Okay. So first query is to display, we want to display all the reservation details, okay? So this time, just a little bit different. I remember, like if you remember, we created a method, okay, that like, this is a common general, like a receipt for like for the reservations. But this time, like the query is different. It asks you to create this formatted output. So it's not the same one. So we're gonna have to create it here and then display that information. Okay. So what we are gonna do is like search through the list for each. Okay. Reservation. Okay. Reservation in reservations. Right. So what is the like the format of a for each is that first the data type. In this case, the data type is a class. And then a name for like instance from it. So that's what we call like we like name it reservation. In reservations, that's the list. We are iterating or like searching through this list. Okay. So for reservation in reservations, for each reservation in reservations, what we are going to do, we're going to like display the information in the form like requested format. Okay. So in the requested format, okay, I'll just use console for here, like console write line, okay. In the requested format. In order to create the requested format, I'll copy paste that like information here, okay, to kind of like make it simpler to know what is the format I'm looking for. So I'll copy paste this here inside like okay. This would be like the format that it is asking us to do. Then you're gonna like replace the numbers with like the variables that like with the variables. Okay, reservation ID should be replaced with reservation ID. Okay, customer ID reservation.customer ID. Auto ID reservation.auto ID. And for the total cost, if I recall, we created a property for it that only gives us the value of that total cost. So in that case, we don't need to call the like calculated method that calculates it. We can do that as well. So we have two options. Either we call the property or we call that method to return the value of total cost. In this case, since I already have like the property, I will use the property reservation dot total cost. You see, okay, if I look at this like a property, it says it's a P, it's a property, and it only has a get side. Means that you can get the value, but you cannot use this property to set a value to that field. If you want to set a value or store value or change the value of total cost, what should you do? You have to call the calculate like method to calculate total cost. That's the only way that you can like change the value that is stored in that field. Okay. So the only way to change the value of total cost is to call this method when using the object call this method so that it can like change, like recalculate or calculate the total cost, and then it returns the updates the value that is like in that field. Okay. So that's a just like created a new format for the reservations, like for the formatted output, and that's how we can use it. Using the properties to get the value stored in the fields, and then like basically creating that formatted output. Now, let's think that for some of the questions moving forward, you're gonna have to create this format for the outputs. And I don't want to copy paste it. That's why I want to create a method to do this. So I'm going to create the same query solution, but using a method. So first, I will create a method. I want to create, sorry, static, okay, and of the main method. I want to create a method that I can pass the information about each reservation. It creates the string and then returns this. Okay, so I want to call this and it will return me a string, the format, and then I will name this just like, generate output, okay. Output message. If I call this, I want to pass this information for each reservation, and it will create that string for me and then return it. So that means I need to pass the information through parameters. So that means I need to create like method and add the parent specify some parameters for this method. So I want to say, okay, this method will have a set of parameters. Through them, I can pass the information. So the parameters are, you should get the reservation ID, customer ID, auto ID, and total cost. So it should have four parameters. One parameter, reserve. I will name this, it's a parameter. I can name it anything I want, right? Reserve ID. Then oh, int cost ID, int car ID, and double cost. Okay, so it will and then it will return data string. And again, let me copy this here so I can replace it. Serve ID, cost ID. So I created a method that gets these values, these inputs through parameters, creates that string with those values, and then returns the string. Okay. And now I will do the same code, but this time using a method. So for each, okay, the same thing here, serve through the reservation. Okay. Also write line. And this time I will call this method and pass that those like information about each reservation. So first reservation, okay, reservation dot, the first one is a reservation ID. Reservation dot customer ID, reservation auto ID, and reservation total cost. Can we see the difference? The difference is that I can reuse this code, but I cannot reuse that code. If I have to create this message later, I will just call this method and pass the information for another task. But I cannot reuse this. I have to copy paste it. Okay, that's the difference when you program using methods, when you have codes that are right, it will be reused again and again. This time, for each reservation, you pass the information to the method, it creates the same formatted output and then like it returns the output. Next time, if I ask you to change this, the format, you only apply that here. But if you have used this code multiple times and copy pasted, if I ask you to like change something in the format of the output, you have to apply that at different part of the program. Okay, so the method makes it much simpler to like understand the code, as well as changing the code, as well as reducing the number of lines that you create for the code. Okay, so that's our first method that we create here. In this case, for each reservations, we pass the reservation information to the method. It creates the form a string like based on that format and returns the value, and we show that to the user.
I just want to ask, what would be different between doing this in the actual program versus doing it in the class? Because on Wednesday, we did the same thing in the actual reservation class.
That's a great question. Okay, let's go back to the class. Okay, so I created this method with this format, right? Okay, in that you cannot use this one, right? Because the format is different. The requested format in this case is different. It asks for reservation ID, customer auto ID, and total cost. This is not the format. Okay, so the format here is that customer ID, reservation, auto, rental, state, and cost. So I cannot call this method. One option is that you add another method to this class and say, I'm going to add another something like this and say, okay, this one is like, for example, like the second one. And that's the format I'm looking for. Okay. And use that. But here's the thing, we can't like do this over and over again. Okay. We cannot like create like every time we create, like add more and more thing to the class and itself. Sometimes you have like general view of like, okay, this happens for each of them. That's why you add it to the template. But sometimes, okay, maybe it's temporary, maybe it's different. So you have to create it not in the template, but here locally, kind of like getting to know. So that's the difference. And the here, this time is that this is something that like you're using it here. It's not part of the template. Okay. So when you're creating the template, usually you kind of have an idea that is like some of the things that are common and you have to put them into the template. But after that, what comes usually is something that like temporarily, like I can like maybe like the person who asked you to create this like program changes their mind about like the format or like gives you different format. So it kind of some things that you want to figure out. If they say, okay, this is like there are two versions only, like in this case, either this one, okay, or this one. In that case, you like if you're sure, okay, if they tell you that there are two versions, okay, then that would mean that it's a good idea to add it to the template. If they agree that that's like the maximum, there are two versions, either that or this one. Okay. Usually, like the template doesn't change like that much because like you have an idea and then over time, like you kind of like like reusing it. See, since we created this, we haven't changed anything about the template. So we are just like using that template in different formats. Okay. So let's move on to the next question. Or to create a new reservation. Okay. So this time we want to like create a reservation, a new reservation for a customer and add it like again, add it to the list of reservations. Okay. So how to create a new reservation? So in order to create a new reservation means that like you need to like basically you're collecting the information and adding it to the list of reservations. First, I will create an object from the class. Okay. Another object, let's say reservation. Okay. I want to create an instance from the class so I can store the information in the object and then add it to the list. You can perform this part. Let me just also mention, you can like do this part in different ways a little bit. But like, let's keep it simple. just like we want to create a new like object from the class, okay, and like it's like initialize the object. Okay, we have two constructors. One that receives parameters if we have the information already. One that doesn't have any parameters. That's when we can use it here. That we don't know the values of the reservation. We are going to collect it one at a time. If you remember, we created two constructors here, right? One, so it can be used if you already like when we are creating the like the reservation, we already have like information. So like create the object as well as like set up the information. One for cases that we don't like, we can call this reservation constructor like this case that like we don't have the information and we're collecting them. Remember, that was the case. This was different. Okay. In this case, we call the other constructor because we had the information already. So we started the object as well as like stored the information right away. So we call that constructor. But in this case, since we don't have the information, we'll call the constructor by adding the parentheses and no parameters. Basically, you're calling that constructor that doesn't have any parameters. It allows you to start using the like the objects. If you have um, let me review this one more time. Okay. So what was this? This is only creating an object from the class. But in order to use the object, also you have to initialize it. And that's the second part. Okay. This part, by adding that part, you're also initializing the object and let it like set it up to be used. Okay. So set it up to be used. And let's say reservations. Okay. Oh, okay. So now prompt the user to get the customer ID, the auto ID start date, end date. We already have the reservation ID and like daily rent. And then you want to like later we can calculate the total cost and add it to the list. So first console right line enter customer ID. Okay. I want to store directly the like the data that I will collect, I will store it in the object. Okay. So reservation 3 dot customer ID is convert to int. Anyway, console dot write line. Okay. Enter auto ID. Line enter uh, like a pickup date or start date. Rental date. That's the rental date. Yeah. And like we are storing the dates as a string, so I don't need to convert or anything. So console read line. One more left. Console read line. Return. We already have the reservation. This reservation is reservation ID. Okay. So I will just set the reservation ID like this way manually, just, that's the reservation ID. And for this reservation, the daily rent, like daily rate is 45.5. Okay. Now, um, I also like have one thing I need to do for the reservation to calculate the total cost. Okay. So reservation 3 dot calculate total cost. Here's the thing. I created the method to return the value. So why? Because in some cases, if I need, so I can like know what is the value of total cost. Okay. Either you can use this way, okay, just like total cost, a variable. Okay. If you need this, I created in cases that I need to like get the value. But since I also have like a property for it, you can also use that as well. So in this case, either you code this way or okay, so either you code it like this or code it without this, both of them should be fine. It calculates the total cost and carries that information. Why? Because even the calculated field, we set the calculated field as a like class field. Remember, anything that like you think, okay, this information needs to be carried over time by the object. In that case, that field, that like thing should be specified as a class field because you store information in the class like the fields and then carry them. Okay. So for example, we created this class with these fields so that anytime we store this information, create an object, okay? Create an object and store the information in the object carries that information throughout the program, carries that information. That internal state is inside the object, is stored inside the object. And anytime you need, you can check its value. So the only way to do that if that field, okay, you've created a field for that field and store that information in the field. We have created these fields and we store them. So that means the object carries that information. If I didn't specify them as a class field, if I didn't create these fields and I would have like only like the local variables, that would mean that, for example, like in this case, the different days is a local variable. It calculates it, and after calculation and returning the value, the value will be lost because that field, that variable is created local, not as a class field. So this is something like you kind of like want to like I don't know, go back and forth to kind of like get a good understanding of the difference between a local variable versus a class field. And that should help you to kind of like see when do you need to like declare something as a class field versus when you want to have it as a local field, like inside the method. This is something that like gets kind of like more clear over time as you practice it more. But like often in the practice we do, I kind of like give you like the things that probably you need to specify, like you want to specify as a class field. Okay, it was too much. So we went through them. Okay, we collected the information about the new reservation. We calculated the total cost. The last step. Last step is to like add this to the list. Reservations that add and add this reservation reservation 3 to the list. Let me ask you a question, okay? I'll just type this here, console.writeLine. And I'll say reservation 3 dot total cost. What do you think will happen if I run this code? Do you think like I only add like I added this part, okay? So it like creates an object. Let's say this is the only code that we have, and like we are going through this, okay? And I have here, I will like call like console.writeLine, I will call the property, and then reservation.calculate total cost. What will happen if I run this code? Why is it an error?
Because we don't have the value for the total cost per reservation.
Exactly, right? So you haven't like basically here we set a value to each of these fields, but before like when you start before this part calculating, you haven't set the value to the total cost. So that like field is null for now. If you try to get this value, it's like it's empty. Okay. Either it shows you an error or like at least this is not correct. You have to like set a value to it, and then you see it doesn't show you a syntax error. It's not a syntax error, but that field has not been initialized or a value is not being set to that field, and you're trying to read its value. Okay, so pay attention to that part in about like the order that you're going to use them. When you're creating a class, the order doesn't matter. You just create the template. But when you start using them, keep in mind how you like set the order. If it was here, then it would be correct. Because now by calling this method, I set a value to total cost, and then I can read what is stored in that field. Okay, good. Okay. Okay. Query 3. Display specific reservation by reservation ID. So this is one that we did last session, kind of like an example of it. We want to do it, but also like we want to like the reason that we want to have it first reviewing that as well as implementing it with methods. Okay. So first, I want to prompt the user to give me a reservation ID. Okay. So I want to like search to see whether that reservation exists. And if it after like if I find that reservation, then I want to display that information. Okay, so let's do this input. Okay, so console, that's right line, enter reservation ID. I want to prompt the user to give me only one data point. So I'm not creating a new object from the class. I'm just getting one field, one value, like a data point. So I'm getting the reservation ID. That's why I created a new like a new variable. So I can store it in the like in this like get the information and store it in the like variable. Okay. Now think about like the process. So we want to go through this list because there are a ton of reservations and we don't know which like whether this reservation exists. So we need to like uh, search through the list and check whether there is any reservation with that reservation ID. So I implement this with like using two like variables as well. So when I have the index, I will set this to negative like -1 and then a counter. Okay. Let's see why we need this like a counter. So for each reservation, reservation in reservations. if reservation dot reservation ID is equal to reservation ID or reserve ID. Okay, so I want to like search through the list using for each, and I want to see if the reservation ID, like a check for the reservation IDs, if I find a match with the one that the user is like provided. So remember, we have a list, and the list always starts from zero, the index. 0, 1, 2, 3, and then as much as like the list of the length of the list. Okay, so I want to create created a counter and index. First, I will use a counter. Like basically what I want to do is like I want to check every one of the reservations that is stored in the reservation list, and if see like to see if like the reservation ID is like the same as the one that the user provided. So counter is a start from 0. Okay. If that's the reservation, that's okay. If not, then like you want to add one to the counter. So basically the counter wants to move forward. Okay. So that's why with every iteration, I want to add one to the value of counter. With every iteration, I want to add one value to the counter. And let's say here, when the counter is 3. And then it checks the reservation here and says, okay, the reservation ID that the user gave you is equal to the reservation ID that's stored here. That's when I found the location, the index. Now I will say, okay, I put the index equal to counter. Okay. Why did I use like index and set it to negative like -1? I wanted to make sure that like, the list itself starts from 0. So I cannot set the index to 0 because it's already starts from 0. So I want to set it to something that like it doesn't exist, -1. So later I can check its value. If it is still -1, that means I didn't find it. I didn't find any reservation with that reservation ID. But if it's changed, that means I found it. Okay. So in this case, index will be equal to counter and then break. Why do we break? Because there is only one reservation with that reservation ID. Once you find it, the search is over. You want to break out of the loop. You want to break out of the loop. Okay. So we created this loop to go through the list. And now let's check after the search, like after the loop, outside the loop, if index is not -1. What does that mean? The only way that the index is not -1 is that this happened. That means like you found a reservation that this was correct. You found a reservation that its reservation ID was equal to the one that the user gave you. So the value of index now indicates in which part of the list that reservation is stored. So I can use it to like whatever like the request is done. In this case, it is like requested that I display the information. So I will say console the write line. Okay. Let's this time again use that method that we created, generate output message. Let's say we're like using that method. So I want to pass the information about that particular reservation to the method so it can create the string and return it. So I use the reservations list. Okay. And I have the index. When you have the index, that means like you're gonna use like this, brackets, say, okay, the index. Dot, okay, the list and then index. Once you specify the index, it is like it knows that it's a particular, it's one reservation. Now, when you add the dot, you can access to the object's fields and like methods. So in this case, first is the reservation ID, and then reservations index dot customer ID reservations index dot auto ID reservations index dot. Okay, so let's do this and then review what we did. Okay, so I prompt the user to give me the reservation ID. I did the search to see if I find any reservation in the reservation list with that reservation ID. Okay. After the search, I check the value of index. If it's changed, it's not -1 anymore. That means I found it. So I can use the index to know in the reservations list in which index that reservation is stored. Add that index, it's a number, it's 3, 4, 3, whatever. That's like the variable carries that value. And then dot, once you add the dot, like because you use the index, it gives you the exact reservation that is stored in that like box, in that space. And then you can access to its values, the reservation ID, customer ID, anything. So I call this method and pass the information about that reservation. So it creates the string and returns it based on the format. And then I can display it. So there are multiple steps happening here. Okay. If I want to separate them and make it a little bit like more clear, is that I could have had this one to say, let me see, string output. First, create the output. Okay. Call the method, pass the information, it returns the formatted output, and then display the output. Okay, so we created the method, we pass the information, it creates this string, returns it, and then we can display it. We are reusing that method again, but like we created once. That's the great thing about like methods. Like you don't have to repeat the same code. Any question? Question. Yeah. Okay. Great. One thing, like you know that like this is the part that you're gonna frequently use for different like questions. And it's much better that we put this inside a method. Okay. So I want to create a method. I want to create a method that like will give me that index. Search through the list for a given reservation ID, and it returns the like the value of the index. I want to see like search, okay, search reservations by reservation ID. Search reservations by reservation ID. That means you need the reservations and you need the reservation ID. That tells you the two parameters of this like method. It's the list of the reservations, okay, reservations, and a reservation ID. So if you pass there like a reservation and a list of reservation and reservation ID, it will search for the reservation based on its given reservation ID, and it will return that index. So that means index -1, like -1 encounter. I'll do the same thing here. I want to do this part, okay, the whole thing here, okay, basically doing that search inside that method and then return the index. Okay, so I don't have to like code again and again that part, because now I have a method that gets the list of the reservations. I can pass the reservations as well as a given reservation ID. It like searches through the reservation, check for every reservation in that list, and then after like the search is over, returns the value of index. Again, I can see if its value is that like the same, and then like using it here. So you will like replace this, probably like the code with this one. Great. I'll stop here. Have a good weekend, work on the homework, and also like practice for the midterm.